จะดูยังไงวะอักเสบนี่Walang imagine.
Good afternoon. I'm Mr. Mhlongo, back here with you to take on economics as usual. Our topic of the day is economic growth and development, which is our economic pursuit topic. So on this topic, today we are covering a part of it, not the whole topic, which will include economic growth and development, differentiation, or giving the difference between the two, discussing in detail demand-side approaches to economic growth and development, as well as briefly discussing supply-side policies to economic growth and development. Remember that the topic is a part of our question 1, question 3, a part of question 4, as well as question 6. In question 1, economic pursuit contributes 15 marks. In question 3, it contributes 40 marks. In question 4, it contributes 20 marks. In question 6, it contributes 40 marks. So please join me and see what I have in the pocket. So the following are the lesson objectives that will be achieved during the course of this lesson. After this lesson, you will be able to differentiate between economic growth and development. So here we will discuss briefly economic growth, measuring economic growth, and discussing importance of economic growth. We'll also discuss economic development, measure economic development. This kind of the topic in your examination can come from lower order to the higher order. It's very important for you to be able to discuss briefly so that you can be able to answer those 8 marks. Those 8 marks especially, it can be our 3.4, 4.4, or even additional part. Also, if it comes as a higher order, you must be able to respond. So it is very important for you to know the content first so that you can be able to think bigger if we are assessed at the higher level. Briefly discuss measures of economic growth and economic development. You must be able to discuss measures that are used to measure economic growth and economic development. And then you must be able to discuss in detail demand-side approach to economic growth and development. That's an essay, which is the part of this topic. Also, you will be able to briefly discuss supply-side approach to stimulate economic growth and development. Other than that, this number 4 can come as a lower order, middle order, and the higher order. It is very important for you, if given the topic, you develop the skill to respond to the topic or to the question related to that particular topic from the lower order, middle, and the higher order. So that's a responsibility of your educator to ensure that the topic is assessed thrice so that you will be able to answer any question that will be coming in the examination. Remember, this is not an essay according to our current examination guideline, but it can come as a part of additional part in our examination. Maybe we come across this essay, discuss in detail demand side approach, and then this one supply side come maybe as an additional part. So always be prepared, because as much as it's not an essay, but it can be a part of an essay under additional part. So according to the content that you have already been taught before, you are already informed about economic growth and development concept that you covered in grade 11. It's been taught, and then also you know challenges to economic growth, what is hampering South African economic growth, that was covered in grade 11. You know economic development concept and factors that contribute to economic development. And then you know economic development measures, that was covered in grade 11 again, on how do we measure economic development and the institutions responsible to measure economic development using social indicators. So this is the lesson 40. We have economic growth, which can be briefly discussed or defined as the increase in productive capacity of the country, or the increase in economic activities of the country, or the increase in production of goods and services within the country. That is economic growth. So to measure economic growth, basically we use real GDP, Remember that real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation. So real GDP is used to measure economic growth because real GDP shows true reflection of growth trends of the economy. It does not give false reflection because it has not been, it does not have inflation effect, but inflation has been removed to discover actual growth trends of the economy. Remember, it is very important for you to know the following. If ever economic growth is measured through nominal GDP, that will mean the economic growth trends will be distorted. They won't be giving us the true reflection. Why? I'm saying that because the nominal GDP figures are not adjusted for inflation, they are inflated. We might think that there's an increase in economic growth, while no, there is no economic growth. It's only inflation that has inflated economic growth. So using real GDP is an ideal way or sophisticated way to measure economic growth because its figures are not distorted. They don't they show us the true reflection of the growth trends of the economy. Hence, it is measured through real GDP. So be able to answer the question whenever the examiner asks you to say, why is are real GDP figures preferred to measure economic growth than nominal GDP? Real GDP figures are preferred because they give the true reflection of the growth trends of the economy. Economic growth figures are not distorted if ever economic growth is measured through the real GDP. While on the other hand, using nominal GDP give us the false growth trends of the economy because it is being inflated by the effect of the inflation. And then we'll talk about economic development, which is known to be the improvement of social welfare or the improvement of standard of living for the country's inhabitants or citizens. So remember, economic development is measured by what we call the World Bank using Human Development Index, HDI. So the measures of economic development include the life expectancy, which is known as the number of years an infant is expected to live from birth to death. And also, the other measure is standard of living, meaning we are concerned about the welfare of the nation. Then we can say there is economic development. Remember, economic development is all about the improvement in lives of the people. So remember, people's lives can be improved by to make sure that public resources and important resources are made available in the societies. Also ensuring that people are able to get jobs so that they can afford their basic living. People are able to, are earning income that is not below the poverty line. People are skilled enough to be marketable and start their own businesses. People are having access to the proper infrastructure nearby their areas. People are having access to superstructure or social infrastructure also so that their welfare can be improved. Those things inform economic development. Also ensuring that people are having access to healthcare facilities that can, all of those components can lead to economic development within the society. And then we'll also talk about the likes of the demand side approach. So this is an essay where we'll be discussing in detail demand side approach to economic growth and development. Remember, this approach refers to the measures undertaken by the government to influence aggregate demand. So in order to achieve economic growth and development. So the demand side approach is basically linked to the traditional fiscal policy and the monetary policy. You will remember when we were doing our economic paradigm, we spoke about demand side policies. Now we are talking about them again as demand side approach. So this topic, according to this information you are deliberating today, is not new. It is very important for you as a candidate to link the previous information to the new information. That will help you to notice that this content you are teaching today is not new this year as you are doing grade 12. It's been covered slightly when we're doing what we call the new economic paradigm. And now it comes back again, both the demand side and supply side. It comes back now as another version of economics to ensure that we have economic growth and development. So under demand side approach, we'll basically discuss the fiscal policy approach and we'll discuss monetary policy approach. It is very important for you to know that for the government to be able to achieve economic growth and development, as for the monetary policy, the central bank or reserve bank must intervene by ensuring that maybe there is more money supply available in the economy, or there is more quantity of money in the circulation. That can mainly be done by implementing expansionary monetary policy, by increasing money supply. That can mainly be done also by ensuring that a repo rate is being reduced to encourage borrowings and lending. Also, moral persuasion are being relaxed, meaning central bank basically buy bonds from commercial banks. As for moral persuasions are being relaxed, meaning allowing commercial banks to create more credit, and then open market transactions are being relaxed, ensuring that commercial banks is buying bonds from commercial banks, and also ensuring that cash reserves is being reduced to increase the quantity of money or to decrease vault money in the economy. That will always lead to more money supply, more demand for goods and services, which will always push more production by businesses, because as consumers are demanding more, if firms are having more capacity to produce, they will produce more and supply more. That can lead to economic growth within, also economic development. And then further, we can use what we call it the fiscal policy measures that can, fiscal policy approach that can be done when the state intervenes by maybe increasing government spending and also using taxes to ensure that there is economic growth and development. And then also there are some other measures that will be discussed, which included the triple BEE, EPWP, land reform policies, etc. And then on the supply side approach, we mainly focus on approaches that are used by the government, the market, to stimulate the aggregate supply within the economy. Those include the likes of improving efficiency of inputs, improving efficiency of markets, and also reducing the cost of doing the business. Those components are very important because they encourage businesses to produce more goods and supply more goods and services. Remember, by doing so, that will be attracting economic growth and development. So the following are the concepts or terms or terminologies that are very important for you to understand this topic. So as for economic growth, like I've mentioned before, is the increase in productive capacity of the country. If ever local businesses are able to produce more goods and services, that can result to the increase in economic growth. Economic development is the improvement of social welfare or standard of living or social well-being in the country. Remember, I've mentioned components that can lead to economic development. Real GDP, it refers to the gross domestic product figure that have been adjusted for inflation, where the inflation effect has been removed to discover actual growth trends of the economy. Nominal GDP is a gross domestic product that has not been adjusted for inflation. These are GDP figures that have not been adjusted. They are very, very high because they are being inflated. And then life expectancy. This is the average number of years a person is expected to live from birth to death. Remember, factors that can lead to life expectancy include having access to healthcare facilities. Nutrition also is a part of that. And then GDP per capita. This is the total receivable income by each citizen when real GDP is divided by the working population. So this gives us what we call the GDP per capita or income per capita. We continue with terminologies. Land restitution. We call this one the economic redress policy, focused on compensating those who lost their land forcefully through oppressive policies. And then we have land redistribution. It is very important for you to be able to distinguish between the two. You must know the difference because both of them are about returning land. However, the restitution gives the financial compensation to those who lost their land, while land redistribution gives back the land to people that lost it forcefully. So you must be able to give the difference between the two. The progressive tax system. This is the tax system that is used when low-income earners are taxed less than, while high-income earners are taxed more. So we call this one a progressive tax system. Wealthy taxes. These are taxes that are imposed on the sale of assets. Any asset that may be sold by the business will be taxed, and that kind of tax is called the wealth tax. Then we talk about cash benefits. In this case, we refer to the what we call the provision. The transfer of money by the government to social members, maybe that are eligible. For instance, transferring what we call old age grant, transferring social wages, transferring also what we call this, the child support grants. Those are cash benefits that are extended by the government to social members so that they can improve their standards of living, so that they can be able to afford their basic living, because some of them, like pensioners, they are no longer economically active. So for that sake, they need to receive income that will be able to ensure that they are able to receive that basic living. Also, people with disabilities, it is very important for them to earn living if they cannot afford to work. So that's when the government provide them with the disability grants. Social wages, it's when the state now intervenes by making provisions of a certain amount of money to ensure that those people that are unemployed are able to receive a certain income that can allow them to afford the basic living. Benefits in kind or benefits in natura. These are benefits extended by the state citizen to improve their welfare. In this case, we talk about the government having to provide people with healthcare facilities, educational facilities, and then protection services, or protection and security services, or defense. So those are part of the benefits in kinds or benefits in natura. Property subsidies. So in this case, we refer to what we call subsidies given by the government or the private sector, maybe to employees, so that they can afford to buy the fixed property, so that people can be able to own the fixed property. Then they are given subsidies by their employers. It can be the government providing the housing subsidy to employers so that they can afford the housing or to buy the fixed property. Demand side approach involved the discretionary changes in monetary and fiscal policies with the aim of changing levels of aggregate demand. Supply side approach refers to the measures used to impact changes in the aggregate supply of goods and services produced in the economy. Employment Equity Act is the redress policy which prohibits discriminatory actions in the workplace based on gender, race, and disability, etc. So these were just concepts or terminologies. Or in continuity, we still have the broad-based Black economic empowerment, which is the economic redress policy introduced to promote participation of marginalized people in the economic mainstream and procurement. Basically, it was introduced to ensure that Black people are able to participate in economic mainstream by giving them power, so that they will occupy high positions in workplace, so that they will be able to own basic resources and important resources such as capital resources. The regulation, this one, it refers to the removal of unnecessary laws and restrictions or regulations to improve economic efficiency. Privatization is the transfer of ownership from public sector to the private sector. Capital formation is the increase in capital stock in the economy. Human resources refers to the all mental and physical effort exerted and is traded on labor market for wages and salaries. So here we talk about economic growth. So it's very important for you to be able to briefly discuss economic growth for 8 marks. This topic can be from lower order to the higher order. So let's say we talk about maybe the middle order here. That's when you must be able to briefly discuss economic growth. Like we have mentioned, economic growth is the increase in production of goods and services for the country over a period of time. So it is the increase in productive capacity measured quarterly. If economic activities increase, economic growth is likely to increase. So the increase in investments, employment, aggregate demand on goods and services, new industrial establishment, and production of goods and services stimulates economic growth. So whenever within the economy there is more inflow of investments, especially the direct investments, that can lead to more job creation and more income available in the economy. For that reason, there might be more aggregate demand because people will be employed. And then also, if ever there are more industries being established, maybe with more local entrepreneurs establishing businesses in the country, that can also lead to economic growth, because as more industries are being established, there can be more production of goods and services. There can be more employment opportunities extended to people in the production of goods and services. These will stimulate the economic growth. So how do we measure economic growth? So it is mentioned that it is necessary for the nation to measure economic growth to determine the welfare of economic activities. So you can come across a question whereby the examiner will assess you to say, why is it important for the nation to measure its economic growth? It is important for the nation to measure its level of economic growth so that it can discover the economic welfare of the country. Remember, measuring economic growth might seem like everything is okay and fine with the economy, while there are some challenges that are faced by the economy. Therefore, it is very important for the state or the government to intervene by measuring economic growth so that relevant measures can be taken by the state if ever economic growth is not doing well. For instance, if ever the state measures economic growth to discover that economic growth is slumping or declining drastically, the government can intervene by using some relevant policies to stimulate economic growth. For instance, can use both fiscal policy and monetary policy and other policies that are possible to ensure that there is increase in economic activities of the country. The government can intervene by ensuring that it supports businesses so that they can be able to face lower cost of production. It supports businesses so that there can be attraction of foreign direct investors in the economy. So it is very important for the nation to measure its level of economic growth, because without doing so, that can lead to even further economic slump. So having to be aware of changes in economic activities will allow the state to always be on point with the relevant intervention or smoothing the economy when necessary. So nominal GDP is converted to real GDP to remove inflation effects. So whenever we measure economic growth, we take nominal GDP, which is known to be GDP at current prices, and convert it to real GDP, meaning we adjust it for inflation, then we can be able to measure economic growth after removing inflation effect. Nominal GDP is the GDP at current prices. GDP figures will contain inflation effect. So whenever, like I mentioned, that whenever we use nominal GDP figures to measure economic growth, we get the full reflection of actual growth trends of the economy. Economic growth is measured through real GDP. Remember, we mentioned that real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation. We call this one real GDP. We call this one GDP at constant prices. So real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation. Inflation effect has been removed. Why? You can come across the question to say, why should inflation effect be removed when measuring economic growth? It should be removed so that the actual growth trends of the economy can be discovered. Because without removing inflation effect, we can come across the false growth trends because of the inflation effect in economic growth figures. Economic growth can be calculated in this way. We say economic growth equals to nominal GDP minus real GDP divided by real GDP multiplied by 100. Then that's when we discover actual growth trends of the economy. So why is economic growth important? Remember, if ever the country is having positive growth trends of the economy, that will mean it is highly possible for the country to achieve economic development, because economic growth results to more national income. With more national income, the money can be used to further some investments, especially economic and social investment that are important for the welfare of the economy and the welfare of the nation itself. Remember, if we talk about the social investments or social infrastructure, we are referring to basic facilities that are important for the welfare of the nation. If we talk about economic infrastructure, we mean infrastructure that can be established to ensure that it benefits the economy. So economic growth is necessary because it is the source of economic development. We know that it's normally impossible to achieve economic development without having to achieve economic growth. When more goods and services are produced, the demand for labor increases, which stimulates job creation. Yes, if ever within the economy more jobs are being produced, maybe because of more industries being established, or because of more foreign direct investment, or maybe because of more investment, or because of more support by the government to local investors or local entrepreneurs, that can lead to a more level of income received by those people employed, which will lead to the increase in income. So we simply mentioned that there will be more demand for labor if ever more goods are being produced, which will be stimulating job creation. And these have a good effect because disposable income will be increasing in the economy. And then also the state will be able to receive more tax revenues because of more income available in the economy. Economic growth results in an increase in spending capacity, which stimulates the multiplier effect. Yes, if ever we have economic growth, there will be a high level of aggregate demand, which will be resulting to the increase in the multiplier effect within the economy. Economic growth creates a good environment for investment. Investors are easily attracted by by good economic climate. Yes, if ever the country is experiencing good economic conditions that easily attract foreign investors to come and invest in South African economy, which will simply create even further multiplier effect within the economy. So if ever there's economic growth, it's highly possible that our economy can attract more investors, because remember, investors are always willing to invest in countries where they will be able to be profitable. They don't invest most in countries where they cannot be able to crack the market and be profitable. We continue with the importance of economic growth. With economic growth, tax revenues increase. Like I mentioned before, the state will be able to receive more tax revenues caused by the high level of employment, high spending, and more profits by businesses. Remember, once people are highly employed, that will mean that the government tax revenues will be increasing, because people will be paying the direct tax, which is known to be the personal income tax, as they pay as they earn. And then also businesses, as more businesses are making profit, that will result to them paying more company tax or corporate tax, which will be benefiting the government also, because as businesses are making more profit, those businesses that are taxable will be able then to pay more tax to the government, which will be increasing the government's tax base. So the economic growth is important because it is having that impact also into the economy. It improves the provision of public goods and services in the economy. Yes, if ever there's economic growth, that means there will be more income available within the country, which will be improving or increasing the state's national income and allowing the government not to have budget constraints as it's planning for the new budget. So more money can be used to provide goods and services for the nation that are known as public goods, which can be either community or collective goods. Economic growth has a great effect on social stability, because employment and poverty reduction result to social welfare. Yes, it can lead to social stability, because once people are employed, there is lower level of unemployment. For that sake, what is going to happen? The poverty will be reduced within societies, and that will stabilize the society. Remember, if people are unemployed, the majority, that creates social instability. There's always like the social protest over job opportunities. So if ever there are more jobs available for the nation, then there will be stability, because there will be no poverty, there will be no crime, there will be no or less theft within our communities. So economic growth is very important, because it allows people to afford basic goods and services for themselves. Also, once we have economic growth, it becomes more easier for the state not to spend more money on providing transfers, especially social wages, because most people will be employed. There will be lower level of unemployment, then there will be less needy people for social wages within the country. For economic growth to create enough employment opportunities, it must increase faster than the population growth rate. Yes, it is very important for us if we want to achieve economic growth as a country. Our economic growth must increase faster than the population growth rate, meaning we can't say we have economic growth if ever our population growth rate is increasing more than is increasing more than economic growth. Because remember, this economic growth creates money that can be used by the nation to spend in our societies. So if ever population growth is more than the increase in economic growth, the money or the income we have will be less to cover for the social needs and also to create job opportunities for those that are unemployed. So for that sake, we cannot come across economic growth if ever we have more population, because the money we have might be less to cater for everyone within the society. So the economic focus, improving GDP of the country. The gross domestic product measures the total number of final goods and services produced within the country over a certain period, usually a year. GDP is regarded as an economic barometer that measures economic growth. To assess economic growth, inflation must be removed for the from nominal GDP, converting it to the real GDP. I mentioned that before to say that for us to have the pure growth trends of the economy, we must remove inflation effect from the economy, from what we call the nominal GDP, and convert it to real GDP. Economic growth is more accurate when it is measured through real GDP, but it is not accurate when we measure through nominal GDP. So it is very important for you to spread your wings and your mind in this case. If ever you come across the higher order question asking you like, why does the government prefer measuring economic growth through real GDP over nominal GDP? You must know that with the real GDP, inflation effect has been removed. So it showed the actual growth trends of the economy. They are not distorted. However, with the nominal GDP, our growth trends are being distorted because they've been inflated by the changes in prices over a period of time, which is inflation. Then economic development. Remember, we've mentioned that economic development is the improvement of the standard of living of country's citizens, or the improvement of the welfare of the nation, or social welfare or social wellness. Economic development is regarded as a well-being or welfare of the country's citizens. If ever people are living under good conditions, for instance, people are well trained and educated, people are having access to proper healthcare facilities to improve their life expectancy, and then also people are employed to earn income in order to afford their basic living. Those will be improving their standards of living, and that will be allowing them to live better lives. Also, if people are having access to basic facilities such as social infrastructure, in this case, we talk about educational facilities, healthcare facilities, security facilities, shopping centers, etc., that can ensure that people are living better and reasonable lives. That will lead to economic development. The government has a major impact on securing people's economic development. That is achieved through efficient provision of basic needs such as housing, water, and electricity, social infrastructure, and economic infrastructure. These are very important facilities that people need in order for their living standard to be improved. People must have proper housing and shelter. Then we can say they're living under better conditions. People must have access to clean and purified water, as well as electricity that will change their living standard. People must have access to social infrastructure such as city parks, shopping centers, etc. And then also, economic infrastructure must also be available so that investors can be attracted to invest in the area, so that there will be improvement of the social and economic welfare. And then we measure economic growth. The United Nations uses the Human Development Index, HDI, to measure the level of economic development. So how does this happen? If, let's say, UN is measuring South African economic development, South Africa is responsible to publish its statistics on social indicators to international platforms, so that United Nations can access information and be able to measure if South Africa is on the lower level, mid-level, or higher level of economic development. So South Africa complies with the international benchmark by providing its its indicators to United Nations and other international organizations, so that the country can easily be compared to other world countries in terms of growth and development, or in terms of economy and welfare. The following three aspects are used to measure economic development. Actually, we have four of them. So remember, Human Development Index, the HDI, is used by United Nations to measure the level of economic growth, the level of economic development. So you can come across the definition in 1.3, defining Human Development Index, to say the index that is used to measure the level of development across the world. That will be Human Development Index. Or you can come across the question to say, which tool is used by United Nations to measure the level of economic development? United Nations uses the Human Development Index. Or the question can be, mention any two measures of economic development used by United Nations. You will be mentioning life expectancy, which is known to be a number of years a person is expected to live from birth to death. Education or literacy rate, which is known to be expected in average years of schooling, concerned with adults who can read and write. Also, real income per capita, or GDP per capita. This is the total receivable income by each country's citizens, or by a working population, if income is distributed equally or fairly. Then we have standard of living. This is known to be the welfare of the nation, or the wellness of the nation. These are four measures of economic development. They can help you if you are given an opportunity to maybe to briefly discuss economic development for 8 marks. So you must also make use of them as you discuss, because first you define economic growth and development, and then you give key aspects of economic development. And then after that, you discuss measures of economic development that can give you maximum of 8 marks. Or maybe the question can change to say, why is economic development important for each nation? Now that question is becoming the higher order question. Once we say why is economic development important for each nation, that simply means now you must have the background information or knowledge of the economic development. What is it? How is it measured? Which are the components that are important to determine the level of economic development? Practically, so what do you know is important for you to see that in the country or particular area there is economic development? Then you can answer the question. It is not the content knowledge here. It's a critical knowledge. However, you must have a background and the basic knowledge so that you can be able to critically answer the higher order question. Let's say the question is saying like, why is it important for the country to achieve economic development? Or what is the importance of economic development for each nation? Remember, if there is high level of economic development, there will be lower level of poverty and improved standards of living. The level of crime will be reduced because people will be affording the basic lives. So those are some responses you can bring on board. It is very important that when you answer such questions, you don't list, because if it's 8 marks, especially if it's higher order, you will only get the maximum of 2 marks listing. The rest will be claimed together for 2 marks, but you must give the fact and the effect of the fact. It's very important. That's a critical response. If you answer the question to answer like, why is economic development important? You say, maybe the economic development is important because it results to, reduce level of crime. You need to give us more information than to say, with economic development, means there are more facilities available for people within the community or society. There is income available or earned by people because they are employed. So that will lead to people not being dependent to others, but they will be independent because they are able to receive income to afford their basic living. Open your discussion, but answer in point forms. Ensure that if the question is in that form for 8 marks, you bring the minimum of 4 points in full sentences. Do not bring less than that, because you render yourself to forfeit marks as you discuss you briefly discuss your importance of economic development. And then economic development focus. Basic needs for all countries' citizens must be available. For us to say we have economic development, people in the country must have access to basic needs. Which are those basic needs? We talk about the likes of health, like I've mentioned before, proper shelter or housing, having access to electricity and water, sanitation. Those are very important, ensuring that people are not affected by malnutrition. There's a proper nutrition available for people. People are employed. People are skilled and educated, meaning they can be marketable and employed. Improving human resource development through educational opportunities, skills and training, as well as access to basic healthcare. These are important components of economic development, because if we don't have access to proper healthcare, that will mean we will mainly be affected by different diseases. Also, at the same time, our life expectancy will be dropping now and then. So that will mean our economic development is being compromised because we don't have these basic needs. It is important also that we have access to educational facilities, because education is very important for one to be able to be marketable and employable. Without having that particular skill and the piece of paper that allows you to look for a job or to start your own practice of business, that will mean now no one can recognize you, because people are rewarded according to merit lately. And then improving citizens' freedom, economic and social freedom, allowing them a freedom of choice through a variety of opportunities. Making social and economic infrastructure available to everyone. It is very important that in the communities where you stay, there is proper infrastructure. In there, we refer to both social infrastructure and economic infrastructure. What are we talking about when we refer to that? If we talk about social infrastructure, we refer to the infrastructure that benefit the society the most, that ensure there is a social wellness, e.g., having hospitals, clinics as healthcare facilities, having schools and libraries as educational facilities, having maybe also security force and security facilities such as police stations is very important. Having city parks, having training facilities that will allow people to be skilled. Those are very important components so that we can say we have economic development. So if we talk of the economic infrastructure, we mean infrastructural facilities that will benefit the economy. We know that whatever benefits the economy spill over to benefit the society also. So in this case, we refer to having access to shopping centers and malls that will attract investors to come into the country. In that case, we mean if you bring the shopping center or a mall in the particular community, you attract investors that will benefit the economy and also the society. So that lead to economic growth and economic development. Having job opportunities being created, meaning establishing businesses within our communities so that people can be employable. That can also result to improvement of economic development. Providing the road infrastructure. Remember, road infrastructure is a key because it doesn't mainly benefit who? Benefit a motorist or benefit the society. It also benefit the economy because goods and services are transported or mobilized from one place to another through the road infrastructure and those corridors facilities. Then we move to the demand side approach. So the above that have been explained can be either be 1 mark, 2 marks, 4 marks, 8 marks, or 10 marks, provided where the question comes. If ever the question come in listing or identify, let's say identify from the extract, that is 1 mark. And then mention any 2 measures of economic development, that is 2 marks. Briefly discuss economic development or briefly discuss economic growth or briefly define economic development or briefly define economic growth, that will give you 2 marks. That's a definition. And then going further to say maybe briefly discuss economic development, that is 8 marks. Briefly discuss economic growth, 8 marks, or distinguish or differentiate between economic growth and development, 8 marks. But then when you go to maybe higher order, and maybe why is economic growth important for the nation? It goes to 8 marks now. It's the higher order. Why is economic development important for the nation? That is also 8 marks. Why is it important for the nation to measure economic growth? That also gives you 8 marks or 4 marks. And then why does the government prefer using real GDP when measuring economic growth over nominal GDP? That can give you 4 marks, but depending, it can also be 8 marks. So be able to answer such questions. I think I spread it across so that you can take whatever that will benefit you going forward. And then now we are moving to the demand side approach to economic growth and development. So the key here, the content is based on what can be done based on demand. How can the stimulation of demand benefit or result to economic growth and economic development? Remember, the demand is a key factor of the economy. So the demand or the aggregate demand is a very important component of the economy, because if people or households or consumers are not demanding more goods and services, that means producers are not motivated to produce. They mainly produce because there's a demand for goods and services. If ever they produce goods, producers or businesses are producing goods that are not demanded by consumers, that means their businesses will not be running. Our economy will be affected negatively. Therefore, the demand is a very important component of the economy, because with more aggregate demand in the economy, that will mean firms are encouraged to produce more. As firms are encouraged to produce more, there will be more demand for labor. If we have more demand for labor, people will be employed. As they are employed, we know employment is a source of income. Then people will be earning income. As they earn income, they will be able to pay tax to the government. They will be able to afford goods and services. So all those components brought together, they result to economic growth, because with more demand for goods, there is more productivity or production in the economy. Also, firms are attracted to even enter the market market and produce goods and services. So there will be more investment because people are demanding more goods and services, resulting to further job opportunities or further job creation in the economy. That will simply lead to economic growth and economic development. Where does economic development fit in this case? Economic development is highly created here automatically because once we are being employed, we have income. Once we have income, we access basic needs. For that sake, our living standards will be improved, and that result to economic development. Also, for the state to encourage the demand, encouraging investors, that will lead to the government also having to provide basic facilities, both social infrastructure and economic infrastructure, so that businesses can find it easy to operate within the society as they produce goods and transport goods from one point to another. So the demand approach is very important for the economy, because without the demand for goods, that means firms are discouraged to produce goods and services. The demand side approach involves discretionary changes in monetary policy and fiscal policy with the aim of changing the level of aggregated demand. Remember, there is a difference between the demand and the aggregated demand. It is very important for you to keep that in your mind. Like we saw in the previous examination for supplementary, there was a definition that was required for candidate to define consumption. They found it very difficult to define consumption. So those ignored concepts, you need to take care of them. The demand and aggregate demand, there is a slight difference between the two, because if you talk about the aggregate, you mean the overall demand. But if you talk about the demand alone, you mean individuals or specific demand for the particular product or by particular individual. But the aggregate means the demand across. Then if we say there will be an increase in the aggregate demand, we mean the overall demand will be increasing because of some reason. It focuses on all measures that can stimulate the total demand in the economy. So remember, which are measures that can result to the stimulation of aggregate demand? When the state intervene by improving, maybe, by lowering taxes. If there's a lower taxation in the economy or society, that will mean, especially we talk about maybe personal income tax, people will find it more affordable to do what, to demand goods and services, because they will be having more disposable income. And then also, if we talk about reduced value-added tax, that will mean the cost of goods and services will be lowered, which will result in people affording more, and also businesses encouraged to produce more goods and services. If the company tax is being lowered, that simply indicates that businesses are having an incentive in the economy to produce more, because they are not faced by most of what we call regulations by the state, or they don't have to pay more income to the state, which is a part of red tape that discourages their production. So if ever taxes are lowered, that will always benefit the economy and the demand for goods and services. If ever the state intervenes by increasing its spending through improvement of the social and economic infrastructure, that will mean, or also increasing job creation and transfers, that will mean there will be more demand, because that will lead to more disposable income in the economy. When aggregate demand increases, it stimulates businesses to increase output, which in turn can increase employment and improve living standards. So, like I've mentioned before, these things are highly connected to create economic growth and economic development. We continue with the demand side approach. According to the international best practices, developing countries should run their economies in such a way that it creates economic growth. Yeah, for each nation, it is very important for the country to ensure that it achieves economic growth. That's why each and every nation is targeting positive growth trends across the world. So that the nation can be able to meet the basic needs of the society. The proceeds of growth should be used to create social transformation, human capital formation, and redistribution of income. The well-accelerated aggregate demand is an incentive to businesses to produce more to meet the demand. That's crowding out effect. If something is known to be a crowding out, meaning it's a spillover effect, it benefits someone, it moves from someone or from one party to another party. The government tries to ensure that people are able to afford more goods and services, but that indirectly benefit businesses because businesses will be benefiting through the increase in aggregate demand for goods and services. They will find themselves enjoying to produce high level of output, and that will result to them being more profitable. It is therefore important to keep the demand high within the economy since it determines the supply of goods and services that are required. Yes, if ever if ever there's high aggregate demand in the economy, that will be encouraging businesses to produce more if ever they still have capacity to produce, and that will result to improved supply of goods in the economy. So there's a good interrelation between the demand and the supply. So we talk about demand side and the supply side. So we move to the monetary approach used by the South African Reserve Bank to improve aggregate demand so that economic growth and development can be achieved. Monetary policy is driven by South African Reserve Bank, SARB. It is used to influence interest rate and money supply in the economy to stabilize prices. The content is not new. It is very important for you to auto-connect the content. This content was covered in Smoothing Business Cycle and the New Economic Paradigm. The same content again is coming back as a part of inflation on the what we call economic issues. So it is important for you to ease the burden on your shoulders by noticing the repeated content, but you just have to contextualize it and make sense of it. But it is not new. The monetary policy approach consists of decisions by the central bank or reserve bank as a part of monetary authorities to influence the interest rate and the money supply in the economy by implementing inflation targets set by the government. The central bank manages the availability of money by means of open market transactions, open market transaction, cash reserve requirements, moral persuasion, as well as the interest or repo rate. We continue with the monetary policy approach. Manage the cost of money by means of interest rate. So remember, central bank intervenes by influencing the repo rate. Remember, repo rate is the interest rate charged by the Reserve Bank to commercial banks on their borrowings. It is very important for you to have that background information to say whenever commercial banks need money, they happen to borrow money from the Reserve Bank. So as they borrow money from the Reserve Bank, it is not interest-free. It is charged interest that is known as the repo rate or repurchase rate or the lending rate that is payable by those commercial banks that are borrowing money from the central bank. Variations in the levels of interest rate increase or decrease the cost of credit and determine the quantity of money through the workings of the money multiplier. So if ever the central bank intervene by influencing the repo rate, commercial banks then are forced also to influence their interest rates. So once repo rate increases, that will mean borrowings will be expensive for commercial banks. Whenever they want to borrow money from the Reserve Bank, they will find it too expensive. For that sake, what is going to happen? There will be less borrowing from the central bank. That will be decreasing money supply in the economy. Then commercial banks then will be pressed also to increase what we call their interest rate. As the interest rates are increasing by commercial banks, households and businesses will find it expensive to borrow money or get loans from commercial banks because of high level of interest rate due to payable interest or returns will be too high. Then people find it expensive to borrow money and they decline. For that sake now, that will lead to less money supply or less quantity of money in the economy, resulting to less demand for goods and services. Then the aggregate demand has been influenced. But if the central bank wants to increase aggregate demand, it will simply lower or decrease a repo rate. By lowering repo rate, that will result to commercial banks decreasing their interest rate as well as what we call the prime rate. By doing so, businesses and households will be encouraged to take more loans from commercial banks, which will be leading to them having more disposable income and more money supply to demand goods and services, which will be increasing aggregate demand. As aggregate demand increases, that will mean firms are encouraged to produce more goods and services. That will be leading to firms demanding more labor. As there's more demand for labor, there will be more job creation. With more job creation, there's more or further disposable income available in the economy to benefit the government through the tax base or revenues. And also the demand for goods will increase even further. Variations of exchange rates for the purpose of the changing terms of trade are used as an auxiliary method to bring about the changes in the stock of money. We continue with the monetary approach, controlling repo rate, like I've mentioned, the effect of the interest rate that commercial banks can offer for two purposes. It influences credit creation by making credit more expensive or cheaper. Like I've mentioned, if ever repo rate is being increased, credit will be expensive. There will be less borrowings and more savings. If ever repo rate have been lowered, there will be more borrowing. Stabilize the exchange rate by encouraging capital flows and outflows in order to take care of deficit or surplus on the current account of the balance of payments. The interest rate are directed by changes in the repo rate. So any kind of the interest rate will be influenced by change in the repo rate. And then we continue with the monetary approach. Conducting open market transaction. Remember, this is all about the Reserve Bank having to be involved in the open market by buying or selling bonds or shares or financial securities between itself and commercial banks. So to restrict the bank credit, this SARB or central bank sells securities, and when the banks buy these securities, the money flow from banks to the central bank. And remember, once the money is within the central bank or South African Reserve Bank, that money is not available in circulation. That means the quantity of money has been reduced. So when the central bank is selling bonds or shares or financial securities or government bonds, it's one thing, by the way, to commercial banks, it is collecting money from the circulation. Commercial banks will remain with less money, which will lead to them not giving more money as loans into the society or into household and businesses. That will be decreasing money supply. The bank then have less money to lend and cannot extend as much as credit as before. Then to encourage credit creation, the central bank or South African Reserve Bank can buy bonds or financial securities in the open market, can buy bonds from commercial banks. Its central bank is buying bonds or shares from commercial banks. It is giving money back into the circulation. By doing so, commercial banks will be having more stock of money available. With more money available, they will simply create credit by giving people loans. So money supply will be increasing in the banking system. Banks use also cash to create credit. This process is preferred to as quantitative easing. Whenever the central bank is buying bonds, it is giving money into the circulation. We call that a quantitative easing because that means central bank is relaxing the money supply. If you ease, you make it more simple for one to access something. And then we continue with the monetary policy. Moral suasion or moral persuasion. It is also regarded as a credit control. The South African Reserve Bank or central bank consult with banks and persuade them to act in a manner that is more desirable based on the current economic conditions. So if ever economy is doing totally bad, is faced by the slump, that will mean central bank can intervene by encouraging banks or influencing banks to relax moral persuasion, to ease moral persuasion by creating credit. Why? Because we know, or they fully know, or they are well informed that people are always tempted to spend if there is more credit. They spend the money they don't even have, which creates more demand for goods and services. However, if the economy is doing too good, maybe at the prosperity level, that will mean that the central bank must persuade commercial banks to be very strict when creating credit to avoid the inflation effect. The persuasion is often linked to the transactions by SARB in the money market, e.g., the buying and the selling of bills and bonds. If the banks are generous in extending credit, the South African Reserve Bank can call them to be less lenient. However, simultaneously, it can sell paper in the market and drain excess liquidity, meaning more cash, so that banks can have less money. So these instruments are working hand in hand. Indirectly, they affect each other. If ever there is more credit creation or moral persuasion is being relaxed, Central bank might not confront commercial banks to lower the credit, but can sell them bonds so that it can collect the money from the circulation. That will then be reducing money supply in the economy. Credit creation result to consumer spending. Consumer spending money they do not even have that stimulate the aggregate demand in the economy. Then we move to the fiscal approach. Okay, I think I skipped something. The cash reserve requirement. That's when the the central bank intervenes by influencing the quantity of money by maybe setting high limits of cash reserve requirement that are required from the required by the Reserve Bank. So remember, in the cash reserve or reserve requirement ratio, central bank will set a certain ratio that commercial banks are obliged to keep to avoid high liquidity within the economy. By doing so, if ever a cash reserve requirement is increasing, that will mean commercial banks are having more vault money. The vault money means you are having more money. However, that money cannot be used because it must be kept on the reserve for the commercial banks. So in that case, there will be less money supply. However, if the central bank decide to lower cash reserves, that will mean commercial banks will be having more money in their disposal to be used. There will be less vault money and more disposable money that can be given out as loans to the society or to their clients, which will be increasing money supply and aggregate demand for goods and services. That is the one that I skipped on what we call on a monetary approach. The fiscal approach. So fiscal policy is driven by the Department of Finance. It aims to facilitate the government political and economic objective. Government can use fiscal policy to change taxes and government expenditure, which can stimulate or inhibit economic growth and development. Remember, whenever the state intervenes by by increasing taxes, that can result to the state receiving more tax revenues, but in the short run. But if ever that tax is too high or aggressive, that can lead to tax evasion. Remember what we covered on the public sector. And then when the state intervenes by lowering taxes, that can lead to the state maybe receiving less tax revenues. However, consumers will be encouraged to demand more goods and services because if ever VAT has been lowered, that will mean there's more real income. People will demand more goods and services. If ever personal income tax have been lowered, that simply tells you that people will be having more disposable income or household will be having more disposable income to demand goods and services. So also, if ever company taxes have been lowered, that will mean businesses are having more money in their position so that they can further their investment and create even more job opportunities. Those things are resulting to economic growth and development. With the state intervening by increasing its government spending, that will mean there will be more improvement of the infrastructure. Remember, there are these things that we call public-private partnerships. Any injection by the government into the economy or into the society through improvement of the infrastructure, the state will be employing a private sector to do jobs on its behalf. That will result to even more investment in the economy and more job creation. So with more job creation, that also lead to people having to earn income and afford more goods and services. While the infrastructure is being developed to benefit the society, people are getting income to afford their basic goods. That increases both economic growth and economic development. Fiscal policy focuses on the budget deficit and surpluses to increase or decrease aggregate demand. The general objective of demand management is to maintain aggregate demand so that it can, it is not too low or not too high. Remember, if the demand is too low, that will result to businesses or investors withdrawing from the economy. If ever the demand is too high, they will be attracted to invest in the economy because of more available income within the country. However, that can also lead to the inflation because our businesses might be having the supply constraints or less capacity to produce. So as they face that kind of situation, they might ensure that they sell their goods at higher prices to reduce the level of demand, which is known as the demand pull inflation. We continue with the fiscal approach. South Africa national budget is the main tool to drive fiscal policy and implement the fiscal policy through a progressive tax system. We know that if ever we talk about the progressive tax system or progressive personal income tax, we mean high income earners are being taxed more than low income earners, and that income is used to benefit the poor the most in the economy. That is being mentioned here. These taxes are used to finance social development. The poor benefit more than those with high income from social allowances. Remember, those people that are unemployed, being old or being disabled, they have transferred that they receive from the government to afford their basic living. So that's why we say that the main beneficiaries from these tax revenues. Wealth taxes, like we mentioned before, in to say these are taxes that are imposed on the sale or purchase of assets. Properties such as houses, offices, and factories in urban areas are taxed annually. So as that being taxed, we have transfer duties are paid when properties are being bought or sold. Whenever one is buying the property, that will mean there will be a transfer duty which is payable so that the property can belong to the new owner. And then also we have capital gains tax that is known as CGT. This is the taxation that is levied on the sale of capital goods and such as property and shares. If ever offices are being sold, then there will be capital gains tax that will be imposed in there. If ever shares are being sold, there will be capital gains tax that will also be imposed. So that's why we say the CGT, capital gains tax, refers to the taxation that is imposed or levied on the sale of capital goods, such as shares and the property. Shares and bonds are taxed when they are being traded. Taxes are used to finance expenditure that benefit the poor. And then we continue with the fiscal approach, cash benefits. In this case, we refer to any benefit that are given by the government financially to the society, such as old age pension, child support grants, war veterans grants, social wages, etc. These are grants that are given by the government to social members that are maybe eligible to work. And then we continue. These are also known as social security payments that are given by the government. We continue with benefits in kind or benefits in natura. In this case, we refers to benefits that are transferred by the government to the society in terms of maybe providing public healthcare services or facilities, providing educational facilities and services, and then also providing security and defense force to the society free of charge. These are benefiting the society, they benefit the most, and they're the part of redistribution because those that are having income are able to afford private schooling, private hospitals, and private security. However, those that are not having much income cannot afford that. Therefore, it is important for the government or the state to provide benefits in natura for the nation to be able to improve its welfare or wellness. Provision of healthcare, education, school meals, protection, and municipal services, as well as infrastructure. Where the user fee is charged, poor people and low-income earners benefit more than others because they either pay nothing or they pay less to access those goods. For instance, in other areas in our country, some other people or some communities are not responsible for paying for water supply. There are no levies imposed on their water supply, but other areas are having levies imposed on water supply. They must recharge to get water. So that simply means some areas are chosen by the state to say no levies will be imposed on them because of their lower welfare, because of their lower living standard. If ever there's high level of unemployment, the area is mainly made of maybe informal settlement and also RDP houses. That means most people in the area or in that demographic area are unemployed. Most of them are pensioners, therefore they will not be affording to pay for water. Then the government intervenes by not levying, or the municipality intervenes by not levying for the use of water in those communities. That's why we are saying some people, poor people benefit the most, or underprivileged people benefit the most, because where their user charges, they either pay nothing or they pay less compared to the people that are having more income. Limited quantities of free water and electricity are provided. Yes, the state intervened by also providing free water or subsidized water, especially of 5,000 liters per month in some communities. And also some are having subsidized electricity in a monthly basis as they purchase at the end of the month. This ensures the standard of living of the marginalized people is well improved, which is linked to economic development. We continue with fiscal approach. Other redistributions. Some macroeconomic policies have advantage that favor the So in this case, we talk about the likes of expanded public work programs that are put in place in underprivileged areas so that there will be a level of income being received, lower level of poverty, and improved living standard. Remember, under EPWP, that's why the state intervened by providing some community projects in communities, giving some people tendership in communities so that they can maintain road infrastructure the most. Then they can be able to employ people of the area. Those people will be able to acquire skills or to obtain skill that can be used even later after those contracts have lapsed. That will be leading to them being improved in their level of skill that can be used even in future. Also, their current level of income will be improving for them to afford basic living. So those are some other approaches. And then also we talk about strategic integrated project. Like SIP, provide employment subsidies and other cash benefits such as training, financing, and export incentives to small, micro, and medium enterprises. These are EPWP being mentioned. Also, I've explained them. Previously, disadvantaged people receive preference in these projects that are mentioned above to improve their level of economic development. And then land redistribution and land restitution. Remember, these are land reform policies. So in this case, the state intervenes by doing what? With the purpose of land redistribution, it gives back a portion of land to people that lost it forcefully because of apartheid discriminatory laws. So that land can be used for farming or agricultural purposes the most. So the purpose of land restitution is to return land or pay cash or compensation to those who lost their land because of discriminatory laws after June 1913. So under land restitution, the state will give them monetary compensation on the land that was lost. And then land redistribution focus on giving back land for residential purposes and productive use. It is given to those people that lost is because of discriminatory laws or acts. The aim is to redistribute about 30% of agricultural land to the previously disadvantaged people. The money for redress is provided for the main, from the main budget. The money for redress. Remember, this is a part of redress policy. It is transformational because it is trying to correct imbalances of the past that were created. We continue. Property subsidies. In this case, we refer to the situation whereby the business or the government will be providing the subsidy to employees so that they can be able to afford buying the fixed property. So subsidies help beneficiaries to acquire ownership of fixed residential property. Government housing subsidy schemes provide funding options to all eligible persons earning less than 3,500 per month. The money of this scheme comes from the main budget. Now, the question is, how does the private sector intervene to ensure that people are able to own fixed property? The private sector intervenes, especially banking sector, by providing or extending mortgage bonds or loans for people to be able to afford houses. Whenever people want to buy houses, they don't have cash. They borrow long-term loans from commercial banks that are known as mortgage bonds. And then those loans will be paid maybe for the period of 20 to 25 years. Then they will be able to acquire ownership of fixed property or houses. That's how the private sector intervenes. How does the government intervene? The government intervenes by providing what we call housing subsidies to its employees so that they can afford to buy housing. It is very important for you to be able to answer this one. How can the private sector intervene to improve ownership of fixed property? The answer has been mentioned. How does the government improve the ownership of fixed property or housing in South Africa? The answer has been mentioned. The different approach, in this case, we talk about increasing production. So an increase in production of goods and services lead to increasing disposable income of consumers. Remember, there will be more demand for labor. Increased production can be the result of increased government spending, high investment spending, the businesses, or high exports. Government fiscal policy, as a part of other policies, the government can reduce or increase tax, or increase income tax or indirect tax, such as excise duties or liquor and cigarettes. And then we continue with different approaches. The government monetary policy. By reducing interest rate, the cost of credit is lowered. Households can now afford to borrow more money, increasing their disposable income and their consumption. Government program to satisfy basic needs. The government can assist poor households to satisfy their basic needs such as clean water, healthcare, etc. Economic growth and development will be achieved. And then we continue with different approach. Investment by businesses involve investment in factory buildings, machines, and tools called capital formation. These investment increase the production capacity of businesses and the economy. Investment lead to the reduced unemployment, which contributes to economic development. The government invests in infrastructure such as transport, communication, and in support of firms. We continue with different approach. Government spending in the economy. The government plans to its expenditure on public services and economic affairs to ensure economic development. The government further plans its social expenditure on socio-economic aspects such as poverty. The public works program, such as EPWP that has been mentioned before, they are used to address the problems of unemployment and low-income earners and reduce poverty. Examples include road construction, road maintenance, and low-cost housing. And then we continue the different approach. Imports. Imports are important to the South African economy as it provides consumers with a variety of choices. If there are imports in the country, consumers can have access to freedom of choice, which will be improving their living standards. A wider choice of consumer goods lead to economic development or even growth. Imports also provide essential capital goods and intermediate goods such as machinery, equipment, chemicals, petroleum products, and vehicle spares that are very important for our welfare. An increase in economic growth leads to the increase in import, and a deficit on BOP account can occur. And then we talk about exports. So exports are part of domestic demand as they earn extra income for exporting businesses or firms. Our exports are used to pay for countries' imports, contributing to the increasing economic growth and control BOP of the country. Government actions to promote export include trade agreements, maintaining a realistic exchange rate, and providing export incentive through export promotion policy. And then this is the graph that explains the demand side. In this case, you can see that we have original demand, which is 18, original supply, which is AS, and then in there we have the price and the quantity. And then there is a shift of the demand because there have been implementation of the improved demand side policies or approaches, stimulating aggregate demand by increasing government spending and also decreasing taxes. Increasing money supply through the fiscal policy will be shifting the aggregate demand from left to the right, resulting to what we call the increase in quantity demanded in an increase in the price because supply does not react immediately. This is the graph explanation. In the above graph, the aggregate supply is AS, like I've said, upward sloping from bottom left to the top right. And then AD is original demand curve, which is sloping from top left to the bottom right. And then P is the equilibrium price value, Q is equilibrium quantity. The demand side approach stimulates aggregate demand and shift AD to AD1. The quantity demanded increased to Q1 while the price increased to P1 because supply did not react immediately. And then we continue with the changes in demand. The supply curve remains unchanged at S or constant. The aggregate demand increased to AD1, prices will increase, causing inflation since demand increased faster than aggregate supply. This only occurs if the mixture of both demand side and supply side are not implemented. But once they are implemented, it will not happen. And then we move to the supply side. So the previous one was the part of the 40 marks and essay or section C. It can also be found in other sections, by the way, section A or section B, if not assessed as an essay. So this one is not an essay, but it can form the part of essay component when we have additional part, or also we can also have this one in mainly section B or section A. So the supply side approach is measured undertaken by the government to stimulate the aggregate supply in pursuit of economic growth and economic development. Stimulating aggregate supply has a spillover effect over social welfare because for the aggregate supply to increase, there will be high demand for labor, which increases income level and affordability. And then we continue with the supply side approach. South African government uses the following approaches to stimulate the aggregate supply in the economy. Efficiency the efficiency and effectiveness of markets. And then here we go, the efficiency. If a business achieves its aims of profitability and growth, the business is efficient. Similarly, industries are and markets are also efficient when they achieve their aims and objectives. The South African government imposes aims on the market through law, which they are obliged to pursue, and if they meet those objectives, they are regarded to be efficient. Effectiveness. Government demands that markets operate in a manner that ensure that more Black people are absorbed into the mainstream of the economy because they were previously excluded. 2 acts in the laws were passed, among others, to enforce preference for Black workers and businesses of Black people. Employment Equity Act. This act prohibits discrimination and requires that the workforce reflect the racial and gender profile of the population. Businesses must file an employment equity plan with the Department of Labor, and inspectors from the department visit the business to ensure the compliance over those filed policies. We continue with the supply side approach. At the broad-based Black economic empowerment, the Act provides the legal basis for transformation of South African economy. This requires redress so that number of Black people who own, manage, or control businesses in the economy can increase significantly, and income inequalities can be decreased substantially. Pareto efficiency means that given constraints of the effectiveness parameters, it is not possible to change the allocation of resources in such a way that someone is made better without making someone worse off. It includes productive and allocative efficiency. We continue. The competition. This was increased in the following manner in the market. So by establishing new businesses and recruiting FDIs and the reduction of import restrictions, which increase the competition from abroad. Remember, competition can mainly be encouraged by implementing the Commission Policy Act that allows businesses to enter the market without having other businesses abusing their power. In addition, a commission regulatory network was established to enforce competition practices among domestic business, ensuring that there is healthy competition that does not prohibit the entry of new businesses. There are no anti-competitive practices that are used by businesses in the economy. Commission regulatory network was created to enforce commission practices among domestic businesses, and then we continue with the supply side. Under Commission, the Commission Act aims at eliminating anti-competitive behavior, the abuse of dominant positions, and strengthening measures. So here, remember, this topic is not new also. It is a repetition. You come across the content for paper 2 here under Perfect Markets, where we bring in the Commission Policy Act of South Africa, having to ensure that business are not using restrictive practices, having to ensure that there are no barriers that can block the entry of new businesses into the economy, so that there can be more attraction of business in the economy. The Commission Act of 1998 formed 3 commission bodies, namely Commission, the Commission Tribunal, as well as the Commission Appeals Court, to regulate commission in South Africa, which you learned in microeconomics, like I mentioned. These 3 bodies were formed by the Commission Policy Act of South Africa, and these bodies were fully discussed in our microeconomics. Hence, I said you must link the content. Despite the Global Competitive Index show that South Africa's competitiveness is slipping, meaning we are not highly competitive globally. And then we continue on the supply side. The regulation. This is the removal of unnecessary laws and regulations by the government that prevent the functionality of market. Reducing this means we cut off the red tape. Private sector power imbalances that inhibit the operations of the free market have been revised and some even abolished. Government is committed to improving this, the ease of doing businesses in South Africa. Exchange controls were relaxed, and others were relaxed, but they were not fully abolished, but they were relaxed to allow the entry of goods from other countries eased without much restrictions. Ease of doing business index shows South Africa is slipping also. Privatization efficiency is improved in terms of quality of services delivered and product being delivered if ever firms are being privatized, because remember, privatized business are more efficient. The ease of doing business index shows South Africa is slipping every year. Then we continue. Business efficiency. Some measures serve as incentive to increase the effort and efficiency and greater profitability. So taxes. The country's corporate income tax is 28%, and small businesses pay a lower rate if their income is less than 350,000 over a year, while micro enterprise, the turnover is 750,000. This can be found in this link in case you want to search information. Individual income tax starts at 18% and increase on sliding scale of 45% according to the tax bracket. That can be found on our ZSA information or on this link. The effect of bracket creeping on personal income tax has been attended to in almost every budget, with the adjustments of income brackets. So whenever one's income is increasing slightly, that person might be moved to the next tax bracket, which will be increasing the taxation that is payable on their income. The capital formation. The depreciation of capital goods used by businesses is designed to encourage investment, e.g., purchasing of new machinery may be depreciated over 4 years, 40% in the first year, and computers and electronic equipment over the 3 years. So in this one, the capital formation is very important. Whenever the machine is old, it must be disposed so that businesses can buy new machines that are technically updated. Then they will keep up with trends to produce goods and services, which will lead to increased supply of goods and services. Using old machinery and equipment results to firms becoming even more inefficient in the economy, and they will produce less goods and services. Government, through Department of Trade, Industry and Competition and the IDC, also provides capital and loans to SMMEs and bigger businesses. So IDC stands for Industrial Development Corporations. This serves as incentive to promote efficiency in the economy. We continue with supply side. Human resource development or transformation of education. In this case, we refer to improving educational opportunities and skills to people so that they can be employable and marketable. So this one is a part of government spending, as government have to provide skills to people. It is planned on the main budget. It takes the huge portion. The sectoral of education and training authorities setters must facilitate post-school work-related training, and all these measures are aimed to fostering efficiency, because remember, once the human resource or labor force or workforce is skilled, they become more efficient as they can produce more goods at the less period of time, and also spending less resources without any wastage. Free advisory services or schemes. These ones are provided by the government to local business and small business that are willing to export goods abroad or to foreign markets, so that they can improve their productivity into the foreign market. Examples include development of export markets, managing and running SMMEs, agricultural production, weather forecast, preventing and curing animal diseases. And then we continue with the supply side. Cost of doing the business. Remember, whenever the cost of doing the business is too high, that discourages businesses from producing more goods and services. It becomes a disincentive. However, once the state intervenes by lowering the cost of doing the business, that will encourage businesses to produce more goods and services. That can mainly be done by providing incentive or production subsidies to businesses. If they are given those subsidies, they will be able to produce more goods at the lower cost and supply more goods. Remember, once they produce more, that result to them demanding more labor also. That will lead to economic growth and economic development, and also lowering the cost of the infrastructure, such as the cost of energy, water, and transport, will result to businesses being able to produce more goods at the lower cost per unit. So the availability and reliability of the cost infrastructure services play an important role in financial viability and profitability of businesses. And then we continue. Transport cost. The transport options in the form of air, road, rail, and sea transport. Government controls air and rail transport in South Africa. Only reliable rail services that is cheaper than road transport will turn this around. Then transport costs within South Africa and between South Africa and also export destinations are expensive due to long distance involved. Government has committed to improving efficiency and reliability of rail transport services and making it more affordable. Then we continue towards the end. Communication cost. Communications options are cable signals and mail that are important for operation of businesses. Government controls cable length or fixed and mail communication services. Cable communication in South Africa is the most expensive in the world, but reasonably efficient. The high cost make IT services for businesses and individuals expensive and inhibit global competitiveness. Then we continue. Energy cost, the cost of energy. Two main forms of energy in South Africa are electricity and liquid fuels. Eskom, as a monopoly of electricity supply in South Africa, in recent years, it relates to escalated substantially, and at times it has been unable to meet the demand for electricity. We have seen that happening. Government announced substantial investment in new electricity capacity. Government regulate petrol and paraffin prices in South Africa. Also, even electricity. The prices of imported crude oil are linked to the high international market prices. High liquid energy prices undermine the efficiency of the economy. And then we continue on the supply factors of production. In this case, we refer to the human resource development or labor to say apply migration policies to retain high-skilled workers and curb inflow of less skilled workers into the country, promote quality education and training to increase labor productivity, reduce the power of unions in order to encourage greater flexibility and wage labor practice. Then we continue with another factor of production or input, natural resources, value grow and conserve the natural resources of the country to avoid their depletion. Then also invest in new discoveries of minerals and other natural resources. Also invest in research and technology to increase productivity of natural resources. Even invest in capital goods that can be used to convert our natural resources or to transform our natural resources to finished goods. Then we continue with capital formation. Then promote private sector investment, man-made capital such as new factories. Use public money efficiently to improve infrastructure, public goods and services. And then to promote technological improvement to increase the productivity of capital and labor. Encourage foreign investments through the abolishment of exchange control and other constraints or restraints on the free movement of capital. Encourage the public to save to provide funding for capital formation. Create the stable business environment that instills confidence and promotes investment in the country. And then we continue with the entrepreneurship. Encourage competition through policies of the regulation and anti-monopoly legislation, promote entrepreneurial culture, and encourage new businesses to start up by providing financial and advisory assistances, entrepreneurial education and training, and business-friendly legal environment. And then we continue with the technology. New scientific knowledge in the form of inventions and innovations are applied. Advanced technology stimulate economic growth and development to produce a wider variety of goods, improve quality of goods and services, explore and produce new products within the country. It is important for countries to invest more money in education, technology, and research development so that they can be able to be competitive even in the future and match international standard with the manufacturing sector. And then this is the graph that shows the change in supply. So you will see that here we have our original supply curve and then original demand curve. With the shift or after implementing supply side approaches, the supply have increased from AS to AS1, pushing down the price because the demand did not react immediately. That has resulted to the lower prices and the increase in quantity supplied. There's a graph being explained on the next slide. In the graph above, the aggregate supply is AS upward sloping from the bottom to the top, and then AD is the original demand curve with E as equilibrium point. P is original equilibrium price, while Q is equilibrium quantity. And then the supply side approach stimulates the aggregate supply and shift AS to AS1. The quantity supply increased to Q1, while the price decreased to P1. And then we continue with the explanation. The demand curve remains unchanged or remains constant. If aggregate supply AS increase to AS1, the price will be decreasing, causing more affordability since supply increase faster than the change in aggregate demand. And then this only occurs if the mixture of both demand and supply side approaches are not implemented simultaneously. And then after all of that, our lesson ends, and I thank you, and I believe this lesson will help you as you go further to prepare your preparatory examination that is around the corner. Remember, the supply side approaches can be a part of additional part if you are given the essay of maybe demand side approaches or South African growth and development policies that will be covered next week Friday. I thank you. Enjoy your practice as you prepare for exam.